Okay, so today you guys have exercise 221, which we've kind of been building up for a while. The hope is that you have a relatively well-resolved model and you're ready to do an exterior rendering. If you're not ready, get caught up and get ready, because we have to start creating these exteriors. Basically, in terms of trajectory, we're going to do an exterior daytime rendering today. Next week, we will do an introduction to lighting, and we'll then do an interior rendering. So on Monday, it'll be an introduction to lighting and how lights work. And then on Wednesday next week, we will do an interior daytime rendering. But a lot of times for an interior rendering, we like to have lights on. So we'll do some lights in the scene for that interior daytime rendering. Then we'll move to an interior nighttime rendering, where we turn off the backgrounds and stuff and concentrate on the lighting that's inside the house. And then we'll ultimately move back outside and do an outside night rendering. The night renderings are what everybody looks forward to because they're the really fun ones that are hard to do by hand or fake. We definitely will get there, and then we'll after the interior and exterior nighttime, we will move into plans and sections and actually getting good product out of your Rhino model. So you'll have renderings and you'll have plans and sections, so you'll kind of get the full spectrum. By the way, we're about 2/3 of the way through the semester, so it moves on real fast, right? And it somehow in the fall semester, it always feels like it happens really, really fast once we get to November. There's like Thanksgiving breaks in there, and it just suddenly it's over. So anyway, it is only October. We haven't even had Halloween yet, although if you ask any of the retail stores, they seem to have forgotten that Halloween hasn't happened yet. It's now Christmas already somehow. I don't know. Weird. It's weird. Anyway, so today we're going to work on setting up this exterior rendering. The hope is that you already have this integrated into the site from last class, and that we're going to concentrate on really doing the finishing touches and making this look good. So in order to kind of set up this scene, one of the important things is that I have to establish a sun and establish a HDRI background image so that I have all the pieces of the puzzle that I need. So I'm going to go ahead in my layer stack here and close up a lot of my layers and concentrate on a brand new layer that I'm going to call environment. Okay? And within the environment layer, I'm going to have a sublayer for sun. Okay? And we'll go ahead and make that active for right now. And just like we've done before, I'm going to place the sun on that layer. So I'm going to come over to my V-Ray tools and click on the button for sun. And it'll bring up the sun angle calculator. So this should all be complete review for you, but I'm doing it over again just to reinforce it. I'm going to uncheck manual control. And I'm going to come down here, and depending on which site you picked, you're going to pick a city that's close to your site. So if you pick the coastal one, which happens to be the one I did, I'll use San Francisco as my close-by city. If you're doing the one up in Tahoe, Carson City is probably the closest city to there, so you'll pick Carson City. And then we'll adjust the time of day, and I'm going to do a time of day kind of like I like, about 9 in the morning or so. So I get some decent shadows out of it. And I'll go ahead and say, okay, now I have to remember that I have to actually put the sun in the scene somewhere. So I'm going to attach it right to the top of this wall so that I can kind of see it. And there it is, right? And that is now on the sun layer, which makes life really easy. I'm trying to be controlled as I go through it. So the next piece of the puzzle, now that I have the sun, is I have to establish the HDRI background image. And so we talked about this before, about picking the background image and getting it into your scene. It's worth your time to do a little bit of Google searching for other HDRI images. Background. And I forget, but somewhere, I forget whether I saved it or not, there was one that was a coast example. It's really good. We have to go to the free section. Free is always good. wasn't that website. I should have saved it last time when I saw it. Oh, anyway, I'll come back and have a better look at those. The point is, it's time to actually insert the HDRI image. So I'm going to, under my environment window, have another sublayer, and I'm going to call this HDRI helpers, for lack of a better name, and I'll double-click on it. And this is where I'm going to put the infinite plane. So I'll start with that infinite plane, and we'll drop that in. And then I'll also drop the sphere. And so at this point, it might be easier to, oops, of course I rearranged everything, right? To turn off the layers that are not my infinite plane. And then we'll go ahead and drop in the sphere like we did before. I need to move it vertically, V for vertical, so that it's up here a little bit. And then we'll look at it in the top view. There it is. So my shadow should be off in that direction. So remember, right, in this process, I want to assign that chrome material. So I'll click on my materials, and I'm going to load up chrome. So let me load material. And I have to find where I put it. Resources, V-Ray materials. It's under metal. And I want just the plain chrome, not the blurry or the matte. I want the shiny chrome. And with chrome, I'm going to right-click and say Apply Material to Selection. And so now that's been applied. So I still don't have the HDRI in, so that's the next piece of it. So I'm going to click on the Options setting for V-Ray. And I'm going to go to Environment. And I'm going to click on, under Skylight here, I'm going to click on the little M. And I'm going to change this to be a bitmap, and I'm going to pick that HDRI image. And hopefully I have some HDRIs on here. Of course, why would I have those? So I need to get them. I thought I had them. Let me go back and see if I saved it in the that 218. No. Just checking to see if I already have it. No, I don't have it. So let me go to the digital tool site. Under Resources, I'm going to go to Downloadable Resource Packages. And there's the HDRI images. I apologize for not having these ready to go. All right, so let me go ahead and extract these. So I'll show in folder, and I'm going to extract all to my flash drive into my resources folder, which is where they should have been from the beginning. And I'll go ahead and click on extract. All right, so they're extracted now. And let me go ahead and go back to Rhino. And I'm going to hopefully find, there it is. Resources. Didn't I just save it? Clearly I'm not having a good day. Copy, and I'll put it, somehow I didn't get it on my flash drive. Where It should have been. Still copying, apparently. Come on. All right, so let's try this again. So go ahead and click open. And I'm going to come down here and make sure that I specify that it's a UV general environment, and I'll say OK. And then I'm going to go ahead and load the background as well. Bitmap. Go ahead and open it, and this is once again an environment. And I'll go ahead and say OK. And so now I have those two established. So when I come back here, if I, in the top view, if I render, I'm going to get a shadow and I'm going to get a sun. And they're almost exactly in the opposite from where I want them to be. So I have to go back to my V-Ray options, and I have to change the rotation. So it's going to be the horizontal rotation. We'll go to 180. And we'll go the horizontal rotation here. Oops, already did that one. Horizontal rotation of 180. We'll say OK. And if we re-render, the sun's on the correct side now. So that's good. That's the way we want it. So now that I have the sun in its correct positioning, I can turn off that HDRI helper, and I can turn back on my land and my other layers, like that. So now I have the background image that's been applied, and I have the sun. So if I did a quick render, I should never use the term quick and render at the same time. All right, we can quickly tell that my exposure is way off on my physical camera. So let's go ahead and go back to my camera, turn on my physical camera, and we'll see if that will work a little bit better. And at least you know this happens to me too, right? Okay, so I changed that. I did the render. It looks like some of my materials didn't come through the way I wanted them to, but we can see that I'm starting to establish the basic geometry here. Now, the HDRI that I picked has a bunch of trees in the background, so it's really not attractive. So I went, and while I was waiting for that to come back, I found another set of HDRIs with one that's a Malibu overlook. That looks like it's pretty reasonable for what I'm trying to do in terms of a coast. Obviously, I'm Northern California instead of Southern California, but I think it'll be close enough. So I went ahead and I downloaded that, and I'm going to come back to my land here. and go back to, once again, my HDRI helpers and turn off everything. Look in the top view and go to my options and adjust my backgrounds here for those, the Malibu setup here. All right, and so now I'll go ahead and render again. We hope. All right, we got it to come back, but it's hanging up here in the setup. So I'm going to go back and reset these options and load this again. So let me go back to the defaults. And then let me go. Oh, how nice. Okay, so hopefully I was smart that time, and I just caught myself back up to where I lost. And we're going to go ahead and attempt the rendering again. I should reset the physical camera, though we're still seeing it. There's my sun. We need to rotate it a little bit less than the 180, so it's probably going to be maybe 90. And so we'll go here first. And we'll adjust my rotation, try 90. Oh, wrong direction. Go back to my options. It's going to be more like 270. Okay. Yep, it's pretty good. It's probably a little bit less, maybe 250. And so, again, this is a trial and error sort of thing. It's actually cliffs right now. So I think it'll turn out okay. Because the view is similar to the view, I was trying to make a matchup. Right? Now, if it was a sunset, for example, I would want to adjust my time of day V-Ray sun to match the HDRI. I would want to do the opposite. But in this case, I think it'll work out. But we're going to see if it doesn't work out, then we're going to change the time of day and re-rotate it. So let's go ahead and close that for now. I'm going to turn back on everything except my helper objects. We'll go into the perspective view here, and we'll take a look at what we see. I forgot to turn the camera on, and it looks like you're right. I'm getting the hill instead. So a couple things. One, I need the physical camera to be turned on, and I'm going to turn back on my environment. Look at it again in the top view. Okay, notice that the way my peninsula is, the ocean has to be on this side, the land has to be on this side. So if I turn off everything but the HDRI here, let's do a quick render and see what it looks like. Looks like the land is kind of on that half, so we're going to have to adjust the time of day. So let me go back to my options, and instead of at 270, we're going to go back to 0. And that one's still at 0. And then let me zoom in on this a little bit so we can see a little bit better. And we'll see if the bulk of the land is on the side that we want it to be on. But it also means that my sun is over here, which means my shadow has to be going that way. So I'm going to go back to my sun, and I can select it, and then go to Properties. Hold on. There we go. Modify sun. And so our time of day needs to be a little bit more in the afternoon. So I'm going to uncheck manual control. I'm going to go back to San Francisco. And based on what I was seeing, the time of day is probably about 3 in the afternoon. Notice that I have this little compass here that I can use as a judge, right? And I'm guessing that it's about that. If I adjust the time of day, you can see that that compass swings, right? So we're going to shoot for right about 3 in the afternoon or so. All right? Oops. Okay, and my little sun icon changes, and then we'll go ahead and render. And that's very close to what we're after. Right? So I did the opposite way. Right? I made this, my time of day match this. Okay, so now that's established. We'll jump back out into the perspective view here, and we're going to turn off my helpers and back on my content. There we go. And we'll do a quick render. Again, I said I shouldn't use that term anymore. And have a quick look at what it's going to look like. And I should have saved first. But it's looking actually pretty good. Looks like we have a decent amount of horizon out there. We've got some ocean. We've got some sky. That looks pretty good. We have a huge block of land that should be covered up by ocean. We're going to have to fix that. And obviously, I'm missing some of the materials that need to be applied to this building. So there's still some issues to resolve, but we're on the right track. There's also the sky really needs to be lighter. It's way too dark right now. It looks like it's night and shouldn't be. So since we're here, I'll go ahead and adjust that. This value needs to go up or down. I think it's down. You go to 0.5, and the next render we'll check it and see. So I'm looking pretty good in terms of the environment, but now I need to start to work through kind of materials and fixing things. So like I said, I have this huge chunk of land that's sitting out here that's really supposed to be underwater, and I'd like it to be some kind of an ocean, watery landscape. And so I have created for your use on the digital tools site a very large block. Now, your automatic answer would be, why don't I put an infinite plane down and put a water texture on it, right? Which you can do. The problem is you can't put a displacement map, so you can't get the waves on an infinite plane. An infinite plane has to be flat. It's just a limitation of V-Ray. So instead, I created an object. It's under Resources, and if we go to the Rhino Blocks library and go to Landscape, I have an ocean block that will allow you to put some water into a scene, which you can see now, that goes off into infinity in kind of a hybridized way. So we have two things. We have a 3DM block that needs to be downloaded. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and it'll download. And then I want to move it to my Resources folder. And I should actually have a folder for Rhino Blocks. And call this Landscape. And I'll go ahead and paste it in here. And there's also a special material package that goes along with this. Now, if you downloaded the big material package from the course website already, which most of you did, the material is already in that, so you don't have to re-download it. Okay? So I'm going to go back to my AutoCAD, or I've been teaching AutoCAD all morning, sorry, my Rhino file. And I'm going to go into Edit Blocks, Insert Block Instance. And I'm going to pick that file that I just downloaded, that is the ocean. And I'll go ahead and drop that in. And what this file is, if I zoom out, is it's a giant like dish or saucepan. Okay? It curls up at the edges ever so slightly. See if I can zoom out so you can see it here. So if we zoom out to the edge, it curls up at the edge just a little bit to mimic the horizon instead of an infinite plane, because this is a fixed size of object. Right? It's basically like a giant dish. So what I'm going to do is, obviously when I placed it in, it's too high. So I'm going to go to Move and then V for vertical. And I'm going to drop this down until it covers up right about where the ocean should be. And you can kind of see as you go down, obviously there's not that much beach, but there's a little bit of beach. So it's probably something like that. Okay? And so that now is placed into my scene. I have to make sure that this ocean, which notice shows up here under ocean, I'm also going to drop that under the environmental layer. I want to make sure that that has the ocean material applied to it. So I'm going to go to Materials. Ocean is already loaded, right? And if I preview ocean, it shouldn't really look like much, right? If for some reason you don't have ocean, if you right-click on Scene Materials and go to Load Material, you can then go to your V-Ray materials, and it's under Landscape, I think. No, it's under Water. There's Ocean, and we can load Ocean. Vismap. Right? It doesn't look like much in the preview image. Okay? So once I have that established, right, it's time to start really getting a desired view. Right? And so if I look around at my building, right, I'd like to pick a view as if I were standing someplace on the ground kind of looking at my building. Right? It doesn't do much good to do a rendering like this. Right? I mean, maybe you want some kind of aerial drone image or something. You can do it. But generally speaking, we like images that are more perspective oriented. Right? So something along those lines. It could be kind of a nice view. Right? We get the horizon line out here. We get the perspective of what the building looks like. We kind of get how it interacts with the scene itself. Right? But the other thing to pay attention to, if I have nothing selected, I can come over here to the Properties window, and I can get information about the camera and what it looks like. Okay? So over here under the camera section, I have lens length of 50. Right? 50 millimeter, if you've worked in photography at all, is kind of like a semi-telephoto lens. Right? It's not very wide angle. For architectural shots, generally you want something between 18 and 35 millimeter. And so I like 28 for whatever reason. I think it turns out pretty nice. And you'll see that when I switch that to 28, when I zoom in on the object a little bit, we get a little bit more exaggeration of the perspective. Right? If I went to 18, for example, right, it's going to be very wide angle, and when we zoom in on the object, it's very distorted at the edges. Right? Obviously, we could go down to like a 10, and that would be more like a fisheye, where things are getting extraordinarily distorted. Right? You can see as we get closer, they're really stretching out to the sides. The point is, this is mimicking what a camera lens would look like. Okay? So I'm going to go back to 28, which is kind of the one that I like. And I'm going to reestablish this view. We'll do it something like that. The other thing is, I really, at some point, should do some views other than this view. I tend to always do this view. So I don't know, maybe I'll do a view from a different side. This is just the better view. So I don't know. We'll do it a little higher than I've done it before. We'll do it maybe like that. Okay. Once I have the view established, I want to make sure I save this view. So I'm going to click on the little triangle here and go to Set View, Named Views. And I'm going to save this view as, we'll say, Render 1, for lack of a better name. And this is going to allow me to return to this view over and over again, which is important. Right? Because as we keep making changes and tweaks, we're going to re-render and re-render and re-render. So this is a known view that we can come back to. So there it is. So if I were to go ahead and render now, right, I probably should make sure my materials are set before we get too far along. Let me reload some materials. Bear with me for a second. All right, so the materials all should be loaded up now. And so now we can do our first little test render to see kind of how this is looking. And again, should have saved before I click the render button. So it's looking like the background is still way too dark. We're going to have to deal with that in a second. Okay, so I can tell that the background's too dark. Some of my colors are off a little bit. I don't like how yellow the building is turning out, but those are all tweaks that I'll make as we go forward. So let me make a couple corrections. In that environment, I went down. Let's go up instead. Let's go to maybe 5 to lighten that background up a bit. And we'll go ahead and close this. My view is pretty good, but what I don't have is I don't have any material applied to the land just yet, right? And so that's going to end up being a little bit of a problem because I obviously can't have just land. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my materials and I'm going to load a material that's kind of a generic background. And this works well for stuff that's far away, but not stuff that's close up. So I'm going to go ahead and load a material. It should be under landscape and then grass materials. And it's going to be grassy hill background. And I'll load that. And I'm going to apply that. It's kind of just a mottled green and brown, right? I'm going to apply that to my topography. So I'll apply the material to that selection, which is going to help. But then I also would like to actually put in some grass so that I could kind of accentuate it. And maybe my view needs to actually zoom in a little bit. Maybe I need this view instead. Right? And so you make these changes as you go forward. Right, so maybe I get that view instead. Okay? So let me go ahead and save this view as render 2. And you'll discover this as you go forward, that you modify the views to suit what you're trying to show and not include too much of what you don't want. Right? So in this view, I'm going to kind of accentuate this piece of hill and the building, and I'm going to put the grass in here and not worry about it elsewhere. So I've deliberately cut that part of it off. Okay? So this surface should also have that grassy hill material applied to it. And if we were to render it, and I'm going to render this just so that we have a sample to go from, of what it is now versus what it will become. So bear with me for just a second. Much better on the background now. It was a 5. Okay, so this gives us a baseline to compare. You can see that the grass definitely does not look realistic yet, and that's a problem long term. But it's kind of a good background color. It would work well for on a hillside, right? Which is its intended purpose. Looks like the ocean turned out pretty well. I'm happy. It looks like I'm getting a shadow line, so I'll have to fix that. The sky looks pretty good. I'm generally speaking pretty happy with that part of it. The textures are okay, but really need some fine-tuning, and I'll work through some of that. I'm going to go ahead and save this, though, so that I have it as a backdrop and so we can compare. Let me put it into today's folder. I don't actually have a folder for today. All right, so then I'll go ahead and close that. And now I want to bring in something that looks a little bit better for the grass. And so once again, on the Digital Tools site, I have something called bunch grass. And I've worked hard to build something that will do this kind of grassy-like texture. And grass is really hard. This is based loosely on a tutorial that was written up by Flying Architecture, but I adapted it to be a much taller open field grass instead of like a lawn that was a cut grass. But the concept still works. So you need the bunch grass Rhino block, so I'm going to make sure that I download that. And then there's also a material package. But, like I said, if you downloaded the Digital Tools big package, it's included. So let me go ahead and show this in the folder. There's bunch grass. And I'm going to go ahead and copy it and put it on my flash drive. Again, under that Rhino blocks landscape, we'll put it right here. And I'll go ahead and paste. Excellent. So now I'm going to come back to my file here. Remember, since I have the view saved, I can reorient my view and look down on this little piece there. And what I'm going to do is I'll go to Edit, Blocks, Insert Block Instance. And instead of the ocean, this time I'm going to pick the bunch grass. And I'll go ahead and say OK, and then OK. And if it doesn't crash on me, we'll stick it in. OK, so there's this little kind of bunch grassy looking thing. Okay, it's not very exciting to look at because all of this is done via the material, right? Well, all it is right here is a bunch of intersecting little planes. Okay, so it's not very exciting until we actually kind of start to work with it. So I'm going to move this block instance around a bit. And so let me go ahead and move. And we'll move it back, and then we'll move it over a little bit, something like that. And then I need, and it might actually be easier to do this in the top view. Right, and I'm going to disable all of my snaps. And then we can kind of move this forward. It would be helpful also if I had an environment layer with the bunch grass on it. So we'll make that active, and we'll change the object layer. And then I'm going to go ahead and lock everything else so that I don't accidentally move any of that. Oops. Hold on. Of course, I accidentally... go ahead and copy this. And I'm just going to intersect these as we go across. Something like that. And then I'll go this direction. And in an ideal world, they aren't all evenly spaced. We want to kind of random them up a little bit. Right? And then I'll go ahead and turn off ortho here. And we can start to fill in here. Now, once I get to this point, we run into the problem of these go on the side of a hill. Right? So they're going to start to be too far down, so I need to move them up as I go forward. This is a perfect opportunity for grasshopper, right? But anyway, we're not covering grasshopper, so we're going to just do this manually. I can also array across a surface. That's another option. But it's a little bit easier if I copy, and we'll move this over to, say, there, and then we'll move this vertically, move V for vertical, and we'll move it up just a little bit. And then we can go back and copy the next row in the top view here. So I'll go to copy, and we'll just kind of follow our way around. And then we'll take this one, and we'll move that one up a little bit. So certainly, if we automated it through some like Grasshopper, that might increase the efficiency of this a little bit, but there's no reason we can't do it by hand. It just takes a little bit of time to go through. Let's copy it again to there. We should move that up vertically a little bit, and we'll copy it. And as we get further and further back, the amount that we have to move up increases. Especially with these last ones. So we'll move vertical. The design of these is such that we should get good coverage out of them because they're much taller than they need to be. Okay, so now I'll switch back into my render 2, where we've got all of these pieces sitting there on the side, right? And so when I go to render, I'm going to start to enable some options because when I start to add that many objects, it's going to be complicated. So I'm going to go to my options, and actually before I do anything, I'm going to save. Always a good idea. All right. So now I'm going to be in my VRA options. I'm going to click on the system drawer here, and I'm going to turn on distributed rendering, which we've done before. And I'm going to click on the ... for hosts, and I'm going to say find servers. And it's going to find a bunch of them. Great. And we'll go ahead and resolve the servers. And I probably need to check a bunch more boxes. To make sure I get them all. In reality, I'll check some more boxes, but that's fine. Okay, but the other thing that's important is I'm going to go to the Output tab. And this is where I'm going to control the size of the final rendering. I don't want to do anything bigger than this just yet because I want to make sure it looks the way I want. But if we come down here under Render Output, right, there's a checkbox for Save Render Output. And what this does is it automatically saves the rendered file. And what we found over time is that as we approach the end of the semester and the renders take longer and longer to do, people don't want to, one, sit here the whole time it's rendering, or two, don't want to trust that their flash drive will remain here over time. So when you do the rendering, if you check this box, I talked the powers that be into putting Dropbox on this computer, and it's on all of your computers as well. If you go to Dropbox, there's a folder called Digital Tools. Inside of the Digital Tools folder is a folder called Rendering Autosave. Okay? Double-click Rendering Autosave. Give yourself a file name that is descriptive of you. Right? So this would be this is an exercise 221. And then if you can, it would be very helpful to put the date in, because I will periodically have to go clean this file out because it's going to get too much junk in it. So I have my name, I have the date. I'll go ahead and click on Save. Right? And then I'll also check the box for Save the Alpha as separate, because you're going to want the alpha files later on. So I have that established here before I do the rendering, which means it's going to autosave into that Dropbox folder and ultimately be uploaded to Dropbox. So if the computer powers off while you're gone, or whatever, that file, assuming the render completed, you'll have the file. Does that make sense? So I'm really trying to make your life good. Okay? So you want to make sure you enable that so that it'll automatically save the file. Right? And then once that's done, right, we'll go ahead and close this, and I'm going to run the render again. Okay, and this may take a while. Let me go ahead and save it. Be paranoid. And then I'll run the render again, and we'll take a look at the difference in the two. Okay, so you can see, sorry for the delays in it, but you can see that now instead of that pattern, I actually have some grass with some little blades and whatever. It looks a little muddled on the screen, but if you look at it on my screen, it's better. I probably need to take a little bit more time along the edge and make it look like it's kind of extending over. The truth of it is, if I were doing it, I would probably do it in Photoshop after the fact anyway, because I think it's a little bit faster. But because we're not really concentrating on Photoshop in here, we're trying to get the truly photorealistic rendering, we have to do something like this with the grass. And it probably would take a little bit more work along the edge to really kind of hide these little scallop pieces of my bunch grass. But I can use the same material in the same way to hide that over time. Okay? So anyway, this was taking it a step further. I could also put a rock in the middle of this or something like that. That might help break it up. So there's a lot of flexibility in what I do. I could rotate these a bit so that I don't have consistent patterns. You can see that I have those stripes that are being consistent along that edge. In the middle, obviously, it doesn't matter because they all kind of go away. But up close here, it might matter. So it's just a matter of tweaking the settings, and it'll get there. Okay?